can't do all of it. So we have to begin to look at those behaviors and those kinds of things that produce this. So when I say that it moves from the individual, family, community, it's reinforced over and over again. We all never got in a room and talked about it, but we have the same wounds. When I was on Gil Noble's show, what I found out was we have the same stories. If I had an open mic today and put it right there in front, every one of you could get up and tell a story that we could all relate to, couldn't you? But let me tell you something. When white people hear us, they go, you know, I think you're exaggerating. That was just, that person just probably had a bad day that day. It had nothing to do with your race. But what if they heard an audience full of people, 2004, say, yes, it did. And if you don't believe his story, let me tell you my story and her story and his story. We ain't making it up. This is not a figment of our imagination. It's alive and well and killing us today. That's real. So what does it look like transmitted from one group to the next? And this is an interesting dynamic because we do it. It starts on the level of the individual. Because I tell you about mom and daddy are broken during slavery. And let me tell you how that breaking process happened. Y'all know how Willie Lynch explained it. But I want to talk specifically what you do to dehumanize, to denigrate a people to the point where they learn to be helpless. Because you learn helplessness. And the way learned helplessness occurs is tests were done with animals, animal subjects, conditioned response. Skinner, Pavlov, these were people who started to look at conditioned response. And you know much of what has been said about how people were enslaved. Because Malcolm said that you take the chains off their ankles and you put it where? Put it on their minds. You don't ever have to worry about them, right? And I often give this analogy. This was amazing. My husband and I were up one night. We like to watch the Animal Planet. And we watch all those animals. I know everything about snakes, everything. It's interesting. And this one time I was in the other room and I was hearing, and there was one series where they said when good animals go bad or something. And you know, the little nice foo-foo starts attacking the family and stuff. And they had this one episode of an elephant. It was an African bull elephant in a circus that got done. He said, "You getting off of my back and all y'all getting up out of here." Okay. Elephant went wild, right? Running through, stomping people. You know, I'm done. And then they brought in a zoologist to explain the elephant's behavior. I swear to you, this is what he said. Well, you have to consider taken from its homeland, chained on a long journey, beaten, treated illy, separated, fed poorly, sick, and then under someone's whip constantly. It's expected that he would do what he did. And I came back out, I'm going, you can see it in an elephant. So it gets reinforced, and part of what happens if you tie an elephant, you know, matter of fact, if you knock a large animal down, they get blown out because nothing can knock them down, right? But if you can stop and chain an elephant, if you can stop it from moving against its will, and you're not an elephant, that elephant learns helplessness. They will chain, and now to this day, you can actually walk into different, where there are circuses, and they'll have zookeepers, and they'll have all these different people that'll be working with different areas of the animals, little circus folks. And you'll see the elephants standing next to the chains. Chain's not on the elephant, but it's so used to being chained, it won't move. Matter of fact, you can tie a thread around it, and it won't move, because it doesn't believe it can move. So learned helplessness is a process of, after a while, you hear it over and over again that you are dysfunctional, that you are backwards, that you are underachieving, and you're not making benchmarks. You are all of those things over again. You begin to believe it's true. That's what, in Wrightsville, Iowa, what Jane Elliott proved by Brown Eyes, Blue Eyes in the course of 2 weeks. Changed the scores permanently. The score was changed permanently academically for those children who believed they were on top and those that believed they were on the bottom. So what we have to understand is I think probably, the last 400 years has been one hell of a conditioning for us. And that self-hatred, I heard a brother say to me yesterday, we have to love ourselves enough so that we can outlove how much we hate ourselves. And so we have to get to a point where we understand how we came to do this. So how does it look? Let me give you this example because you all know about it. If you're in a bank, you're about my age. No, you got to be younger than me because I'm not going to be standing in line that long. But let's say you are in your 30s and you're looking at a woman or a man in their 30s and they have small children and their children are where in proximity to them in the bank? It's small children, 3, 4, 5-year-olds. They're actually really very close to you. Very close, so close, in fact, they're touching you sometimes, holding on to your leg. And as you move, they move, all in lockstep together, the whole crew. It's a very unusual sight, but we see it every day. And if the child, and again, I teach human development, and it's normal for children to move about and stray. That's how they learn. There's a certain thing called secure attachment and insecure attachment. And a child that has secure attachment will wander about and talk to people and feel safe. But if our children move, get over here. You'll see it, that little child, just a little bit to the right, child can't move. Well, I started to do the research, so I would ask, the mother why that child don't need to be running around the bank. Okay. Meanwhile, same bank, white mother, 3, 4, 5-year-olds. Honey, come. Oh, no, don't leave that man alone. Put that down. Child is swinging on the little ropes and sliding down the aisles and running up and down and talking to you, annoying everybody in the bank. And the mother's just gently going, oh, no, run. Same bank. Other child, get your. Right? Now, there's something going on in that dynamic. One of the dynamics is that this mother is behaving this way, and everyone, is watching. The little white kids are looking at the little black kids. There's two things going on. It's going both ways. The black kid is learning, oh, he can run, and she can run and play, but I'll get in trouble. And the white kid learns, they must not be able to run and play. I wonder why they got to stay over there. What's wrong with them? There are messages being sent, right? So now children are going to stay and be obedient to their parents. So when the mother, of course, or father gets to the bank teller, kids are lower than the counter. I've watched this. I'm not making this up. So the children will still try to explore because it is part of their task of human development to do so. So the child is going to try to escape. It's normal. Child's trying to escape. Mama can't see me. I'm sliding down the aisle. Underneath the little counter, mama doesn't notice. I'm almost free. Some other black people in the line step out the line. Right? They don't know the mother or the father or the children. They give the death stare. Right? So little kid goes, oh, wow. Get back in line. No, nothing's exchanged. Now we're looking at not just the individual and the family. What is the other level of transmission? Now it's being reinforced on a community level. No words are exchanged. You see, because we've all taught each other that I got to have your back. And I appreciate that. But what we're doing is we are crippling our children. In so doing, not a word is transmitted. And that's why it can't happen when people say, well, Kenya, because they'd love for post-traumatic slave syndrome to end up in a book somewhere where they can bill it, right? They'd love for you to find a pill to fix it. But post-traumatic slave syndrome cannot be solved in that way because it also implies a need for justice. And that means that it's got to heal on all those levels. We have to not only take ownership of ourselves, but ownership of our communities, right? We have to learn that self-sufficiency. So it is something communicated on a variety of levels. And so as a result of that, we have to deal with it on a variety of levels. We've got to heal the individual, the family, and the community. So I'm going to cover one more thing. I want to talk specifically about the transmission psychologically. What happens to us and what human beings do when they are subject to dehumanization. I often say to people that when someone black has to go to someone white for help, what it does to them. Now it's interesting because, we free, right? But something happens when you're in a position where you know that the person on the other side that you're depending on to help you is a white person, isn't it? I don't care how liberal and open and spiritual you think you are. Something else occurs in that room 2004. If you're trying to get the loan, if you're trying to get the food stamps, whatever it is you're trying to get, the whole dynamic changes when that white person's on the other side, does it not? Right? Because even if there are no words, there's something psychically communicated in that room. And I try to explain to people what happens to a person that has to now go to someone that they distrust and have been taught to distrust for their survival in 2004. Because why should it resonate any particular way? I want to talk specifically about the connection between that dehumanization of men and women during slavery and what it did to our relationships with one another. Black men and black women. It's such an important subject that if we don't begin this discussion, we are going to look at the total destruction of our families. We've got to have this discussion. And what we need to know is that we both, black men and black women, fight a war when we go out there. We're both in it and we're both injured by it. But what we have to resist is a temptation to punish each other for it, because that's what happens. That's what we do. I often talk about the story of my son and the little boy that looked at him and said, "What you're looking at, what you're staring at." I talk about that story of this little boy that has so much antipathy for himself that when my son looks at him, it feels threatening to him to such a degree he wants to beat him up. And how in Africa everyone says, "I see you," as a greeting. I talk about that because I saw the disparity and I saw the injury in young boys. Yesterday I heard a young man talk about that. He was about 14, 15 years old and talked about how he saw a young man in the street in Harlem and how just looking at this young man, he wanted to beat him up. He wanted to jump on him. And I didn't have enough time in the day to explain to him all that was going on in that young man, but I do understand what was going on in that young man. I understand why it is respect is so important for black people. Because we've never been respected. I want you to know why we created words like Madia, Big Mama, Big Daddy. Because they didn't call us Mr. and Sir. We created our own names to cling to a sense of nobility. Are you following me? Because we had no value, you see. So we created those terms and those terminologies. And even now some people go, they're ashamed and they get nervous when they hear someone say, "My dear," a big mama. Because I needed you to know that you were great. Because we weren't given titles. Those were only for white people, you see. So one of the things that we have to understand is what that dehumanization produced. So on a very fundamental level, we have to understand that women were subjugated on one level, men were subjugated on another. Women were subjugated to never trust their men, to only rely on the master. Now you understand, we never forgot, and we knew how to protect each other. How many of you saw Sankofa, the movie? Okay. You should see that. It's very good. And the discussion is important because in this movie there is a situation that happens where there's two young slaves. A woman is about 8 months pregnant. And they don't want their baby born into slavery, so they're going to run away. Well, they're caught by the overseers. And so to make a lesson of them, they call all the slaves together and they beat her. But they don't let just anybody beat her. They ask the black overseer to beat her. And he beats her to death. This is someone that was like his sister that he beats to death. And then the camera shot fades and you see that the woman, the medicine woman, goes in and she delivers that baby because the baby's almost term. And so she takes that baby, and the next scene, she's rocking the baby. And the man who beat the girl to death, now, you know, they all got to go back to living with each other. Are you following me? We all got to go back to the field side by side after you just beat this woman to death who was my wife and my sister. And we have to reconcile that. So he comes in, the man who beat the woman to death, and he goes, "The baby all right? That baby all right?" And the woman says, "The baby gonna be all right, but you can't come around for a while, okay? You can't come around." And I imagine what happens to him, right? Because they understand that he did what he had to do because the gun was trained on him. But you still can't come around for a while. Because we got to heal from what you did. How do you do such a thing? Emasculate him to the point where he beats someone to death that he loves. And then to have to look in the eyes of her parents, the people who loved her. And then to have to accept the love from them to you after having done such an act. What does it do to the human spirit? So what I started to look at is the psychology of the beatings and the rapes, because they were done very methodically. So when you take a woman out of a man's bed, that is his wife. You take him out of her bed, his bed, you take her out and you rape her. Not only do you rape her, you give her, pass her around to some of your friends and their children. And then you say to him before you leave, and she better be good or I'll beat you. I don't know that you can destroy a man any further than that. So she goes away and she comes back, and she has two things she's got to do. She's got to take care of her, and she's got to take care of him. And somewhere in his mind, he might wonder, did she enjoy that? Somewhere in his mind, he might think, couldn't you have fought him off? And deep down inside, he knows she couldn't. And then she looks over at him and thinks, why couldn't you protect me? Why couldn't you stop this from happening to me? And then in the second thought, she says, I don't want you to feel pain and guilt and disgust of me. And I don't want you to feel shame. So she soils herself again. And so what we have to understand is the psychology of that, because when they get up the next morning and they look at each other, they're not the same people anymore. And still they have to exist that way perpetually, not to mention their children are watching. So when I started to look at the psychology of that, the rape wasn't simply for the rape. It was to make certain that she was submissive and that she knew fully he could do nothing to protect her. Hence, he was always called a boy. That's why my father couldn't handle the term boy. You know, we hear people say, well, me and my boys. My father would turn over in his grave, somebody called him a boy, because he grew up in the South and he knew what that meant. It meant that you were continually confined to adolescence as a grown man. And so when you begin to look at the interaction, now you have 2004. You have a black man that walks into a social service office trying to get some mental health assistance. He happens to be bipolar. That means manic depressive. And he hasn't gotten his meds because he lost his job and he lost his medical coverage, and so he has no medication. So he's a little agitated, okay? He's a little upset, a little paranoid, but he's walked in here with Susie, who came from the suburbs, that got her degree fresh, who's been taught her whole life to be what? Afraid of him. Because what does he want to do to her? He wants to rape her. Now, if you all think I'm exaggerating, there's a book here called 100 Years of Lynching. If you look at the majority of the reasons why folks were lynched after the advent of slavery, it was because of a white woman. He scared her, he upset her, he startled her, He looked at her menacingly. He tripped over her. All of that could cost a black man his life. And so when we look at what has happened to our men, what must we remind each other of? And what happens to that black man that's on, he didn't have his medication, he's a little agitated. He about 6'9". He can't even fit in the chair, but he's trying to look smaller because he doesn't want to what? He doesn't want to upset or frighten her. But she is frightened, isn't she? She is frightened. So he's trying to figure out what he can do. Maybe I better not look at her directly. So I'm going to hold my head down. So in other words, I'm sick and I'm in pain, but I need to take care of you before you can take care of me. And that's what black people do 2004 with white people, and white people don't understand what's going on. It's a fact. It's a fact. So after you see the emasculation of the black man, the deterioration and the soiling of the black woman, how does that move through history? Well, I told you that they gave you those images over and over again. Because after the illusion of slavery and after the black codes and convict lease, then they said something else. They said, you know what? Separate but equal. Jim Crow, segregation. Y'all gonna be treated just as nice as everybody else. It's all gonna be equal. We just want you to be separate. And we said, hallelujah, that's a great thing. And you know, we did pretty well. And we did pretty well because we had to be what? Together. We were interdependent. We couldn't go nowhere else. So now we were dependent on each other. Guess what? We built beautiful towns. We had banks. We had everything we needed. We patronized one another's stores. We went to the same barbershop. We were the teachers, the doctors. We were everything. And then they looked over there and they said, you know, they're prospering. We thought the trauma was over. But was the trauma over? Oh no, they burnt those towns to the ground. And very often, what was the reason why it all started? Because of a white woman. Because somebody thought somebody did something to a white. It didn't matter. It was a trumped up charge, and it's in the minds of everyone. Because again, the preoccupation was always with sexuality. It's been there forever. From the moment black men came off the boat, white men were preoccupied with their penises. That's an absolute truth. Absolute truth. And the reason for that had to do with a lot of things, but if you consider their lynchings, what was the first thing to get cut off? Always. And that was sold and put on a mantelpiece. Right? So what we have to understand about this is that these are things that became part of our psyches. Black men, black women, white women. Because we became a reminder of our what? Our weakness. When black men look at black women, it's a reminder of failure. So show me something else. And what happened was during segregation, when we were booming and we were doing well, we could have healed. But we didn't get a chance to heal because they said, we need your money. We don't want you to give to each other. There's so many of you. We could benefit from you. And we would tell you, you know what? We know you have an ice maker, but white men's ice is colder. And we believed it. And we stopped patronizing each other's stores because we bought the notion that if it was white, it was better. And we watched our communities crumble. So when did the trauma stop? So then now we have integration, what we never fully integrated. Look around you. We didn't integrate. And so now when we look at that, we go, well, how can we reinforce, though, 2004, the images? You all remember the 70s, and the 60s, and the platform shoes, and you all remember Superfly, don't you? You know, coffee, you remember that? Sweet, sweet back. Black exploitation, now we're going to sell you the image to you. And we bought that too, including all the fashions which they produced that said and reinforced that this is who you are. So they gained wealth as a result of our pathology about who we were. And they showed it to you over and over and over again. Because for white people, they can't feel the guilt. And the number one that comes out is, I don't want to feel the guilt, but you know what? Don't take my privilege. And so what we have to understand is we've got to take this chain from around us. We have to do it. Post-traumatic slave syndrome is alive and well. And if we don't get with it and understand what it looks like between us, so now we have a man and a woman and we're integrated. Now we are up there trying to feel good. I look at, in my book, I talk about something called Never Let Them See You Sweat. And you begin to realize that what black people do to black people. You have somebody, I believe this on a spiritual level, by the way, the first example, the first sign of spiritual evolution and development is to delight in the success of your neighbor. Somebody black, now this is on a community level, they say, yeah, you know, they just bought a house over there. You know, that's an expensive area. They bought that house. Mm-hmm. They ain't gonna keep that house. The only reason why he got the house was because of his, you know what I'm saying? And I started to look at it, the young folks call it hating, right? But I'm telling you the truth. It's so pervasive that it's scary. And I want you to look at it from another level, not out there. I want you to look at it up close and personal. What goes on inside of you, and I want you to get with this on an honest level. You don't have to say it to anybody, but I want you to figure out what resonates inside your body when you hear the success of someone else. I started to pay attention to that. It's not jealousy, it's fear. And it's a fear of being abandoned. And it's what happens every single time. Matter of fact, they'll dog you out. And the moment you fall, they're going to pick you up and love you. Because I just didn't want you to leave me. That's really what it was. I want to love you right here. But when you leave me, when you advance, grow, develop, all that stuff, you're going to abandon me. And when you start looking at the superficial ties that had to happen, think about the fact that you have someone you love on a slave plantation. How attached are you going to be to them? Are you going to have to equip yourself emotionally if one day they're gone from you? How much of your heart are you going to let break? It makes sense that I can't love you too much because I have to be okay if you're gone. It's a duality of reality that no human being should have to deal with, but we're still dealing with it. Or those of us that don't want to be black, we know they're the ones that are Indian. All a sign of the self-hatred, the pathology. That ain't during slavery, isn't it? Isn't that right up? You know them, don't you? Oh, did I mention, yeah, I have a lot of Indian in me. I have people from, you know. So there's that sense. And what we have to understand about that is that pathology moves along. So what do we get reminded of? Now, 2004, you got two people. They went to school. They did the right stuff. They got the little degrees. They, you know, put the little down payment on the house. And all of a sudden, they're living paycheck to paycheck, like everybody else in America is. And they're looking at each other and saying, why can't you be this thing? Well, you know, because white people told us that, you know, now that we're all free, and now that we're all, you know, everything's equal, you should have the 2 cars in the garage and the whole little spread. White people don't have that. But we bought it, and guess who we punished when we couldn't have it? We punished each other. Because she looks at him and says, once again, why can't you protect me? Why can't you make my world safe for me? You're the man. And so he looks for someone that doesn't question that. And so we have to begin to understand that pathology of what we remind each other of, just like that little boy that saw my son and said, what you looking at? It's the same thing. We do it on an adult level. What you looking at, same thing. You think you all that. All of those things are symptoms of a feeling or a degree of dislike for oneself that is more destructive than a war. And it continues. The good hair, the bad hair, all of the things, it's all in the videos, the same stuff. It's over and over and over again. People want their children to pick someone else. They want out of the race. I don't want to look at this black face anymore. Because surely that is the biggest problem there is. Meanwhile, everybody in the world is running, trying to find tans. They're locking their hair. They're trying to manufacture booties. Getting collagen in the lips. Trying to figure out every kind of safe tan there could be. And until they say you're okay and you're beautiful, we don't believe we are. For some reason, J-Lo just gave us permission to have booties. Now it's okay to have one. And I mean that seriously. Those are the things that we have to look at that become part of our pathology, and our children are watching us. Okay? So one of the things that I try to do with the work is not to look at it from a purely philosophical level, but to say, what does it look like up close and personal with a black man and a black woman? I'm married to a black man. I love that black man. And I understand where he is fragile. And I understand what it means to be strong enough to say, I need you. Or I am afraid. And one of the things that we have to understand about what manhood is, because it took me a long time to understand how fragile we all are. Black women fight with their mouths. They fight verbally. No, that's the truth. That's the truth. We can back somebody up off us in a hot second. Right? And it's something that we had to equip ourselves with in order to survive. We would back the white women off. We would back the white men off. We'd back everybody off when we needed to. We knew how to do that. We could take them apart. And if it had to go to the next level, we could do that too. Right? So one of the things that happened, though, with that defense that we developed, that tongue, because I want you to think about this. And I talk often about those words that we say. You know? I know people in families that were treated, Oprah talked about not being treated well because of the color of her skin, knowing which child was favored over the other because they were fairer or